This episode of the Zealous Podcast is sponsored by Perform Better. Perform Better is the leader in functional training by supplying innovative products and top-notch education to trainers, coaches, and therapists. Check out the brand new Perform Better app, designed for professionals who want to stay on top of their game. This free app features education from the world's best. You'll learn from industry leaders including Mike Boyle, Gray Cook, Sue Falzoni, Charlie Weingroff, and many more. Topics range from strength and conditioning, program design, nutrition, business, and marketing. Just go to performbetter.com. In this week's episode of Zealous, I get to chat with Richard Whall. Now, Richard is a lecturer in human movement at the University of Central Lancashire, which is in Manchester, England, the United Kingdom. He's been doing a lot of research into physical intelligence. And so we're just going to jump right into the conversation. Hope you have a good time, and make sure you subscribe if you haven't already.
I mean, we're talking about blending in the mental, emotional state with the physical frame. And they can't be separated, can they? And yet, when we research, we do exactly that. We separate them.
Yeah, well, it's part of that scientific approach is, well, we want to try and control as many variables as we can so that we're fairly sure what we're seeing. If there's changes, it's in that one thing, that one variable we've allowed to work its way through. But actually, nature doesn't work like that. Everything influences everything else, and you can't necessarily control all these other things. And that the whole body-mind issues and those being separated is a big part of what I'm researching around and trying to find out more around. And it's absolutely fascinating when, even through my own conversation, my own language, I still use it a lot. We talk about my body, my mind, we separate them because it helps us get an understanding. So a bit like when we're talking about, we try and separate and isolate individual joints, individual muscles to get an understanding of what their function is and what they can and can't do, what they should or shouldn't do. And we sort of do that same with the body and the mind. Not as much connecting, certainly not from a Western perspective. We're not connecting them back together again. I'm finding as you dig into more of the Eastern philosophies, they never went as far in some of the separation as we have anyway. So there's lots of interesting things to delve into there.
What was your master's degree? I mean, what was the research you did for your master's?
Oh, that's a whole other identity. Well, not a whole other identity. It did sort of everything links through. So we all have these fascinating life journeys, and my life journey. If you sort of go back, I was a sporty child, 2 brothers, 1 sister. We were all sporty. My dad played lots of sport. My mum, not so much so, but she was a very good taxi driver to get us to where we needed to be and do lots of different things. So I played lots of sport, traditional ball sports predominantly, that you'd play in the UK: football, hockey, cricket, golf. With that interest, I didn't realise that actually you could study it academically until I was starting to look at universities. So I was very much down a sort of mechanical engineering type focus through my school and college education up to A level. Still I had the aspirations. I was okay at lots of the sports. I was not as good as I probably thought I was. And I had these aspirations to be professional, getting the realization I'm not quite going to get there. So what's the next best thing while working in professional sport? So I did, and I started, I have to wind back, 1996, I think it was. I started on a sports science degree, having not done PE or anything at school or college. So I did a 3-year sports science degree, did it with maths alongside it, partly to please the parents, because they think, well, what are you going to do with a sports science degree? But if I've got maths, there's other options. Got to the end of the degree, and lo and behold, parents were right. They usually are, aren't they, in hindsight? There's not many jobs around, so what can I do? I can carry on and do another degree then and see if there's more doors open up. So I did a master's in exercise and nutrition science. So very scientifically based. That led me in at the time then into the typical routes out at the time. Sports science, I think in the UK, from my understanding, we're slightly behind you guys in America. We usually catch up or get near enough, but we've not quite got the same infrastructure. Our university sports system, for example, is nothing like what you guys have got. So there wasn't the full range of jobs there. There wasn't the performance analysis. Sports scientists were just about starting to come into the major sports, so soccer in the UK. So I went in, did the degree, the master's degree in sort of sports science, exercise, nutrition science, and ended up working at a tennis centre, which had a gym attached to it. So I had a dual role of working with some of the tennis players that were full-time players or the young athletes coming through, as well as helping run the gym and working with the general public. Did that for quite a long time, probably 5-6 years, as well as getting into more personal training, then took on more personal training away from the tennis centre, and built through. And was trying to make a name in soccer, in football. So my master's research, sorry, going back to that original question, was actually in the physical and physiological demands of soccer goalkeeping, trying to get an understanding of what is it a goalkeeper actually does in a game, so we can try and replicate and enhance those things through training to then go back and enhance performance on the field. It was maybe a bit before its time, and I can hold my hand up and say I'm probably not the sort of person who fits into the football world. I wasn't pushing myself enough. I hadn't played the game to a high enough standard. It was difficult to open doors to get in, and I probably wasn't ready for it at that point either, if I'm being brutally honest. So the things sort of slowly drifted, and I was working more with younger children as well. So the tennis work expanded. I worked with young rugby players, netballers, young football players, and it sort of evolved into this sort of youth coach, and then started working for a company that did multi-skills training across the UK for school teachers. So multi-skills being the sort of fundamental movement skills, your agility, balance, coordination, your locomotion, manipulation, object control, whichever way you want to frame it. Working with teachers, particularly at the primary school, so that's our younger age range, sort of 5 to 11. How can they support children through the normal school day, within PE lessons, at break times, lunch times, recess, I think you call it, how can they do different games and activities with children to help them develop these skills as the foundation for more lifelong participation in sport and different activities? And that was brilliant, traveling around the country, seeing different people, working with different children. And then the financial crash hit, which took a major impact on that business. And I needed to look for something else. And it was go back into personal training and do that, try and drive more of my own business. Or actually, I'd really enjoyed some of the time working in schools, and I retrained at that point to be a primary school teacher. And sort of left the specialism of the physical activity. I still did a lot of that within the school, but became much more of a generalist and was teaching. I spent a few years teaching in our year 3, so that's sort of 7 and 8 year olds, and that teaching across the curriculum, your maths, your English, your languages, your science, your geography, history, and the PE. I managed to avoid music, which is probably to the benefit of most of the pupils that I worked with. And did that, and we moved up the year groups. I ended up at sort of year 6, which is our last year of primary school before they moved to high school. Just, again, these different life journeys and how they evolve, just got a little bit disillusioned with, and I could feel back to my own body. One of the things that sparked where I'm at with my research now was I vividly remember walking across the school playground one morning. So it'd be 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, walking across to get ready for the school day, and just feeling so disconnected from my body. I could sort of hear these big thuds as my feet were landing on the floor, and it was just, it just didn't feel right, because as I'd gone into teaching, I'd spent more time sitting down at a desk, whether that was the actual teaching, the preparation, the marking, or the paperwork that goes with it. And then I started to think about things a bit when you think, gosh, that's what we're doing to these children as well. So on the one hand, I'm this person trying to advocate for healthy, active lifestyles and get kids moving all the time. But on the other hand, I'm this paradoxical I'm the person stood in front, or who sat in front of these children, telling them to sit down, sit still, stay in your chair, and don't do anything for 6 or 7 hours from 9 till 3, other than those few little breaks we allow them to escape the classroom. Like, no, something's not right, and it just didn't quite fit. And then the opportunity came to move into higher education and to work at the university that I'm at now in the northwest of England, teaching on their sport and PE and outdoors programs. So going back to that teacher education side of, so how do we actually help children develop these physical skills? How do we help children engage with the natural outdoor world? And alongside that was an opportunity to go back into research itself. So it was a job that just, in the right place at the right time. They were expanding the degree, lots more students coming into the program. They wanted someone with a primary teaching background and a sort of physical training type background, and the opportunity at the same time to, whilst you're teaching, we'll pay for you to part-time do this PhD study. It was like, wow, pinch myself. It's the absolute dream scenario. And that's where we are now, 4 years further down the line. And that journey is still evolving. But it's, there's a lot of things have gone through the different changes, and I'm seeing things, and it's the academic world and being back immersed in that environment. So with a number of scientists, but a number of sort of people with more of a philosophical slant to what they do, and people with all sorts of different life experiences, it's mind-blowing.
Wow. Well, you mentioned before we started recording this that you've pursued a lot of biomechanics, human kinetics, or gait mechanics through Gary Gray, Gary Ward, Chuck Wolf, Tom Myers, all of that, and working as a speed coach and then long-term athletic development for kids. So all of this being the ingredients of the recipe that's culminating to this research. So can share a little bit, what is the particular exact research that you're currently underway with?
Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. And it's I want to make it clear up front that this is a journey I'm just setting out on, and it's very much standing on the shoulders of giants at the moment, is bringing everyone else's experiences and starting to see what I can piece together and just pull things together in a way that maybe other people haven't seen. So there's nothing revolutionary, maybe. I'm just trying to look at it from slightly different angles. And then the way we apply it is back into that educational field is where I want to go. And it came from, I've got a fantastic supervisor who's supporting me on this PhD journey. And we were sitting in the office one day, just chatting through different ideas. And I'd written down just on a piece of paper, just this little question around, is the body intelligent? And there and then the surveyor just went, that's it. That's your PhD question. I was like, what do you mean? Well, no, that's not really been fully looked at, and it's such a ripe thing to look at. So this premise of it, where is there intelligence in the body? Are we physically intelligent? And that's what sort of started it off. So the working title of the research at the moment is very much called, it's developing an intelligent body. What does it mean to be physically educated? So making those connections with education. Part of that educational journey is to develop and enhance people's intelligence. And I'm very much looking at it from the physical perspective. And based on a lot of my own experiences in this journey that I've talked about, but also trying to tap into other people's experiences. So the philosophical viewpoints, not just of delving back into the published literature and what have other people written, because there's lots of people with fascinating experiences and ideas who have never written anything. So it's trying to go and talk to some of these people as well and try and bring those to the fore. So the first part of the journey, the way it works at my particular university is I'm doing the studies part-time, so it's over 6 years, hopefully. I'm just coming into the 3rd year of it now, and the first couple of years are around putting the proposal together. What is it you're wanting to try and do? Why is it important? How are you going to do it? And then starting down on that road, it starts as a Master's of Philosophy. And you conduct the first few parts of the study, and you complete a transfer report that basically says, this is what I've done so far, this is how I did it, why I did it, this is what I found out, trying to demonstrate and convince the superiors at the university that the question at hand is worthy of PhD level doctorate study, and me as a researcher, I'm capable of doing that study. And I'm just through that process now. So I'm now officially on the PhD doctorate level, Doctor of Philosophy route. So the first part of that study, so developing an intelligent body. So there's a couple of ways, and it was deliberately phrased like that because you can interpret it different ways. Like, well, are we saying we're developing the intelligence that's already there, or are we trying to put intelligence into the body? How does that work? And then the what does it mean to be physically educated part is right. So dependent how we view this bodily physical intelligence, how do we, or what opportunities, what experiences do we need to provide for individuals? How do we need to support them through and guide them through that process to educate them how to become more intelligent from a physical perspective? So there's people have written things already. Howard Gardner would be one of the first that would come to mind on his multiple intelligences theories. I don't know if you've come across those. So
yeah,
intelligence itself, to say I wanted to do a PhD study to challenge myself as a researcher is, I've absolutely gone for probably the toughest philosophical questions that I could potentially go for. Looking at intelligence, which has been talked about since the early philosophies of, Plato, Aristotle, those early Greeks, for thousands of years, and they still, nobody can agree what intelligence actually is. There's no, unified definition of it. We've got characteristics of it, but there's still great arguments that go on within philosophy fields, within the psychologists, within the neuroscientists, with artificial intelligence now being a big thing. So there's a whole challenge in itself. Then, because I'm talking in this physical realm and intelligence, like, well, now you're taking on this massive challenge of the body-mind problem, which again has been a problem throughout philosophical history, and still we've not got to the bottom. Is there a bottom of it even? So I'm trying to really tackle some of these things. And it's just, wow, where do you go? So in intelligence itself, where Howard Gardner would say there's the original sort of points of view is this intelligence quotient, IQ, as we can measure it. And we tend to think of it as located in the brain. It's how well does this brain operate and process information to allow us to solve problems or to rationalize, to think about things in the best possible way. What Howard Gardner did sort of 30, 40 years ago is to say, well, that's a type of intelligence, but people demonstrate intelligence in lots of other ways. If you take intelligence to centrally mean around, solving problems and how you utilize and make the best use of information that's around there to adapt or to learn. He talked about, one of the first to talk about emotional intelligence, interpersonal and intrapersonal. So how you deal with your own emotions and how you socialize and deal with other people and their emotions. Talked about musical intelligence. Kinesthetic intelligence was the one he talked about, which is where the physical intelligence bit comes in. But his was very much around, so that's the control of your body. And it still keeps these connotations, this viewpoint of the separate body, mind, and body as a machine. How well can you control your body to do the things you want it to do, rather than actually how well do you connect as a body and understand and talk the language of your body. And these are, I'm getting to grips with some of these bigger questions. And when you dig in, there's a lot of, philosophers have started to look at these things, but no one's applied it into a physical education background so far.
I find that so fascinating. I mean, we started talking about understanding the body by breaking down like this specific muscle or this specific joint. What will it do? What will it not do? What can it achieve? And so on. And it seems like you're doing the same thing of, instead of taking the isolated event of the central nervous system, can it be an integrated intelligence throughout the entire body? And what does that look like? That's quite a daunting task to be taken on. So I envy you in one way, but do not envy you in another way. That is phenomenal. As
I said, I'm not the first person to look at it. I'm the first person to look at it, as far as I'm aware, in this way, but other people have approached it and looked at things from their own perspectives. So, in terms of that body mind, in terms of bodily intelligence, you go back to some of the ecological dynamics, the whole constraints-led approach, all this self-organizing body. So a lot of Gary Gray's principles are based on it. You can see the underpinnings of it in Gary Ward's things with AIM, that it's not how you can't get your body, your parts of your body to move because you're consciously trying to control them. There's the environment that you're within, and you going through those movements hopefully just allows those to occur. So Gary Ward puts it really nicely, doesn't he, around, I'm just trying to create the environment for the body to heal itself. There is that level of intelligence in the body, and there's this a big push. You could call them debates, constructive arguments. Some are more constructive arguments than others within the sports coaching context around the information processing model of skill acquisition and that whole ecological dynamics model of skill acquisition. How is it, or what actually is skill? How do we acquire it? And that's part of what physical intelligence is. And then you go down the emotional elements of what physical intelligence could be, because your emotions are affected and can be affected by the physiology internally, what's going on in terms of through the breath, through the heart rate, through your posture, through the chemical balances, the different hormones going through the body. And you can influence and be influenced by it if you understand it. So that's where some of the bigger parts to me, and where we could maybe take a wider view. And I think that's the big thing I'm trying to encourage, if you like, through my research. And it's partly through my own journey of, I had this very narrow focus. So what does it mean to be physically educated? I would have answered that question 20 years ago. It means to be good at sport. Yeah, if you're good at sport, you're physically well educated. Yeah,
that's interesting.
For some people it is, but it doesn't hit the boat. It doesn't float the boat for everybody. So there needs to be, is there more to it? I'm not saying there needs to be, but is there more to it? And I think as I've grown and experienced more, and I've talked to more people, you start to say, yeah, maybe I need to widen this viewpoint that I have and start to consider it from a wider perspective. So that this physical intelligence is something that we can or could be developing through physical education. So what actually does that involve? So does that involve the breath work's quite a big thing at the moment, isn't it? It's something that's coming to the fore. Yoga teachers have been doing it for years. Singers, they've fully understood it. Dance have been quite high up with a lot of the movements and the three-dimensional movements, but it's not fully integrated into the PE in the physical education world. And I believe in America, they're fairly similar to where we are in the UK. There's still these very dominant sport models or health-focused models, as in we just need to get people being more active.
Yes, I think about 100 years ago is when that changed. 1920, somewhere around there, 1930s, is that the model for physical education was no longer educating about the physical form through calisthenics and other approaches of the 1800s. And we just went into sports and competition. And for 100 years now, that has been the model that unfortunately excludes a large majority and an ever-growing majority, I believe, of at least American school children. The more deconditioned, the more out of shape a child becomes at earlier ages, the less likely they are going to perform well. and therefore mentally, emotionally, that is not going to be a positive reinforcement. So the further they get away from physical education, and then those children now are the adults that are the decision makers, and they're basing their decisions on their own experiences and what they have been taught to be their truth when it comes to, say, physical education. And it's this never-ending spiral, as I see it, into the maelstrom. So it would be wonderful and refreshing, and truly, by definition, to get a new, fresh beginning on how we look at educating ourselves about the physical form. So
and
I think that's marvelous.
There's one of the other, and I believe it's getting a stronger emphasis in the States. It's certainly big in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, the physical literacy movement. Yes. Now, some people, it's another debatable term. Some people just interchange it directly for physical education and believe it's the same thing. If you talk to the people that were some of the biggest proponents of physical literacy, certainly Margaret Whitehead in the UK, who was trying to develop it, it was very much a philosophical based principle in the first instance around this. And she had similar ideas to where I'm coming from. Hers are some of the footsteps I'm following around, no, we've got this separation of body and mind and we need to try and reconnect them. But she was, to me, drawn a bit too far down, again, the health path and the physical activity path. To me, the literacy should mean, or could mean, a little bit more around the language and communication. So how we communicate with ourselves as a body and as a physical body within a physical environment. And hers just seems to have gone a little bit more down. No, physical literacy is a means to helping people become physically active for life, which is great. If we can get everybody physically active for life, wow, wouldn't not lots of the problems, but significant problems in the world would start to be reduced. So it's a very valuable thing. But another reason I looked at it from an intelligence perspective was I wasn't convinced personally that physical literacy was doing everything it could be doing to address some of these issues and taking a wider viewpoint. So
how so?
Well, one of the big things Margaret Whitehead, if you read some of her very early work, was she started to talk about how we connect and our sensory perception of the world and our sensory perception of ourselves and the dexterity and the handling of small objects and things. And she talked about literacy in that way, but it sort of evolved into this, actually, no, that's too complicated. I need to simplify it for the purposes of her work to just look at movements involving larger muscle groups. So then physical literacy came about connecting just through the bigger movements. You're running, you're squatting, you're lunging, you're throwing, you're catching. Those that are the fundamentals, again, for sport. So we've sort of conflated this. Being physically active means to play sport or do those types of physical activities. And we've not looked at, well, hold on a minute. Surely someone who's really good at playing the piano or any different instrument, if you think of the actual physical skill and dexterity it takes to be able to coordinate all those movements with the rhythm of the music and everything else, wow, isn't that physically literate? So now you have that debate and go, so, okay, then let's take two people in the world. Which is physically more literate? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a competition, but if you took someone at the top of their game in a sport, a basketball player, baseball, American football, soccer, cricket, whatever it might be, 99% of people would say, well, they're the physically literate one. And that musician, no, they're good at music. Well, yeah, they are good at music, but that's through the medium of physical movement and this connection with the body and that physical rhythmical environment that they're within. So there's much more to it, and the speaking the language of the body. So going back to that emotional element of intelligence, do you understand what holding yourself in different postures can do to your emotions? Or do you recognize that your emotions can influence your postures, and that's why you've started to slump down? And actually, if you recognize that, I can start to hold myself. Oh, wow, don't I now feel better? Or when you start to feel those butterflies and that little bit of, hair starting to stand up, or the heart starting to race. My body's telling me something. There's some language, there's some communication going on here. Breathe, slow down, take your time, and now I can change my emotional state, and I can have that influence over it rather than being controlled by it. And that, to me, is what the literacy bit could be as well, is this able to communicate with the body and with other elements, not just through a sport and physical activity sort of focus. So coming at it with a slightly different word rather than trying to challenge, because physical literacy's got so big and it's doing a really good job in terms of getting more people more active. Rather than challenging that, well, let's try and open it up and let's look at it from this label of intelligence, which came with its own issues, but it's fascinating all the same. The other one to go back to, and one of the big names in the intelligence world, if you like, as a scientist, Professor Robert Sternberg. He's been writing on intelligence for decades, and he's more recently, over the last 5 or 10 years, starting to talk about intelligence in terms of successful intelligence and the ability to adapt to the environment that you're within, or adapt the environment around you to suit you. And that comes all the way back into some of actually, the other thing we've missed out on is the whole evolutionary perspectives of what got us here as human beings in the first place. And is physical intelligence, which some people do argue that it's one of the evolutionary oldest intelligences that we have, that certainly. And that's what drove us. Go back to, we are still a human animal. We are still an animal. We are still driven by those same needs and requirements for food, for survival, for shelter, for safety, for procreation and longevity of our species. All those things occur through movement and occur in relationship to our environment. So that's the other big element, and this sort of looks at the natural movement world. So I don't know if you're familiar with some of the people in that, Uido Portal, Rafe Kelly, Owen McCall, the parkour guys, all these sort of, there's some absolutely amazing work again being done in those fields, and a lot of that is around, so actually is part of that natural body intelligence, being able to adapt to the environment and be able to perform and move within different environments, and our sensory perceptions of being in different environments. Now, it's totally different running off-road on a trail, running up a mountain, running through the woods, than it is running through a fairly level street or on a road. And that has whole different meanings as well.
Well, that brings in the musicians as well. It would seem that we have this primitive physical intelligence of the body, where we have the fundamental animal motions, but then we have the higher level of movement, whether it be the finite aspects of seamstressing or musical instruments, or just unbelievable sports skills that are finite, such as a golf swing, which is not a natural movement necessarily in that way. So that's really fascinating. I've never really considered the evolution of physical movement within the body. If anything, I've considered the physical degradation of the human posture due to technology and lack of movement.
And is that part of what? So there's a couple of things, and I'll wind back in a minute to look at the other one. But is that part of what that physical intelligence is as well, and how it developed? So back to that dexterity of how did we as humans then first start to create tools? You go back to bipedal locomotion as one of the key drivers of our evolution. Once we were able to start to walk upright, and the things that opened up. But from a physical perspective, raising ourselves off the ground opens up our head and our senses to be able to see for longer distances. and move around. It frees our hands up for movement, and the tool control, but not just tool control, making the tools. It's an absolute lost art. There are still people in the world who can still, create stone tools. But if you ever have a go, it's really, really difficult. And physically, it's, you need that control, the same as, your top level musicians and sports and athletes. If you look at the two key drivers of our, we're not the strongest in the world. We're certainly not the fastest or the biggest. So how did we survive in that wild environment for so long? Because you talked about PE for the last 100 years or so has been a sportification and competition. PE, if we look at education from the broader perspective and go, well, education's not just that thing limited to what you do in school. Education is the way in which you learn how to be, how to go through life. Our broader physical education was by being in these environments and by being able to work within these environments and survive. So being able to locomote and travel across, whether that's walking, running, climbing, swimming, paddling, creating our own craft, the hunting and gathering. So we got to be able to create tools to dig and get into the roots and the tubers. If we're starting to hunt down prey, we've got to create the spears, the bows. Actually, there's another one of our physical intelligences. We're one of the only creatures, if not the only animal, that can actually look at and hit a moving target. So if you've got, if you think about archery now, probably the archers, and I'm not doing them any disrespect, I hope, because they're phenomenal at what they do, but the Olympic archers nowadays, not sure how they might have survived 500, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, 20,000 years ago, because actually now you're trying to work without all the technology and you're trying to hit a moving target that doesn't want you to hit it, not trying to hit the center of something that's absolutely static in your own time, and you fire when you've got the absolute perfect conditions. So being able to coordinate all those different elements is a huge part of that physical intelligence. So there's a huge evolutionary perspective to it. And then coming back, sorry, I love talking about it, sorry. And there's so much more. It helps me to talk about it too, because it helps me just frame things and think about things. When you say about the degradation of our human, with lots of us have seen that image, Darwin's evolutionary rise, the rise of man from the ape, but now it's starting to, we make the little meme of it going the other way. But if we were physically intelligent, we take Robert Sternberg's look at successful intelligence and our ability to adapt to the environment or be adapted by the environment. Why aren't we aware as much that we're doing these things to our body? Why are we not able to listen to those signals that tell us you've been sat down for too long, and the little pain and the niggle that you're starting to feel is saying you need to get up and you need to move. It's part of what we require. We need to get the nutrients and the joints flush and everything moving around, but we're disconnected. We don't hear those signals. So
well, it's fascinating because we're completely and constantly always adapting to whichever environment we find ourselves in. And like you say, in terms of the tracking of a target, one thing that humans are amazing at, and it's not exclusive to man, but to adapt to environments, and this environment in which you and I have been sitting in front of a screen for the last 40 minutes or so, our bodies have been adapting and normalizing at the same time. So the more we stay here, the more the brain is just going to say, this is how life exists. So I find that element is fascinating. So it's the intelligence that is changing, but it's pushing off old information in some ways to acquire some type of homeostasis in the environment that it's presently in.
Yeah, and there's the, when we talk about that cognitive mental functioning around it, there's, the revolution we're going through at the moment, the technological revolution, there's quite a big cultural revolution as well because of our focus and reliance on technology. So it's this challenge of what information do we listen to? Do we listen to the niggles in our body that are telling us to move, or do we listen to these constant reinforcement around us of, well, no, it's just normal. That's what we do as humans. We sit down. You know, we sit in a car to travel. We sit on the bus. We sit on the train. We sit in the office at work. We sit in the chair at school. We go home. We sit and watch the TV. So culturally, we're adapted to that as well. And does that have more of a role and an input than the physical? And is that what's pushing some of this physical intelligence down, because we don't fully understand it? We, you know, this challenge, this again, paradoxical, we're so intelligent, we can adapt to the environment around to suit us, but we don't recognize that whilst we're doing it, what we believe is in the short term more convenient for us is actually having some of these long-term detrimental impacts. You know, the chronic issues that most of us start to deal, particularly as we get older on in life. There was something in recently in the news that 1 in 3 people, once they get into the 40s, have got a chronic illness of some kind, lots of which are joint related, particularly in the back and the knees. Like, well, yeah, because have we had it built, drawn out of us, this intelligence to understand what we need to be able to correct it and do something about it ourselves? Is it culturally just driven into us? Do we need the intelligence to recognize and start to try and change and get the best of both worlds? You know, the whole, when the paleo movement came about, there were lots of people who, well, why don't you just go back and live as a caveman? And well, no, because the modern world has lots and lots of wonderful things that it's created for us, but we need to recognize and balance out what's beneficial and what potentially could be doing us harm.
You know, I love this conversation because it brings up so many thoughts, and new or existing for me. One being that over the course of the 20 to 30 years of designing programs for individuals that come in to improve their lives, get out of pain, get in shape, lose weight, whatever their goals might be, if we looked at the timeline over this time, I have used the phrase dumbing down programs as we advance on with every year, because the structural integrity and the ability to move diminishes with each year. So the average client coming in 20 or 30 years ago was much more capable in many ways than the average client coming in today. But you've made me reconsider just the phrase of dumbing down, so much that we're still talking about intelligence, but we've been designing programs on the whole in the industry on this increasing slope of trying to do more complexity, more intensity. Yeah, high intensity interval training is tremendous now, with a population whose physical intelligence in that arena is not necessarily going at the same slope rate, but is actually either flatlining or going into an inverted slope. So really it reinforces that for me, I need to meet the person where they are at their level of intelligence, almost like there should be some type of physical IQ test to understand what the physical intelligence quotient is for that individual. And we are kind of doing that with movement screening and assessments and so on, of course. But I just find it, like you say, I could talk about this for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, there's a couple of things. Again, Gray Cook, I've gone through, and I liked to think at the time, and that I was, reasonably up with things as they were coming out. So the early parts of my personal training career, Paul Chek was certainly the big one. The Swiss balls were coming out, and he still is up at that top level. So he came through, and then it was into the sort of the functional movement screen, and I did some of the first courses that came to the UK. But some of Gray Cook's thoughts were quite eye-opening to me. And I mentioned it to a lot of people. So I worked with a group of golf coaches in the UK a few months ago. And I just made the comment around, the remove a negative. So one of Gray's big things, this remove a negative. And one of the biggest negatives we have, unfortunately, in our modern society is the other 23 hours a day that we're alive outside of that 1 hour training time. And that's assuming that you're training 1 hour a day, and that can have a huge impact. It's actually how we live through those other 23 hours is really important. Again, in the UK, Tony Riddle is someone that the natural lifestylist who I'm talking to and working with, because he's someone who's trying to help people understand better ways of, not just incorporating movement into as much of your life as possible, but even the resting postures. So Tony Riddle talks about it. Philip Beach was one of the big proponents of his. Have you read his Muscles and Meridians book?
I'm familiar with the book, but not cover to cover.
Yeah, if you have a look again, his resting postures, his archetypal resting postures, is actually so. You commented we've been here now, best part of 45 minutes or so. We've both been moving around and shuffling around a little bit, but I'm actually sitting on the floor. So even just sitting on a floor is different to sitting on a chair. And you can sit on the floor in all sorts of different postures. And those things are actually, if we use some of the hunter-gatherer populations as possible models for how to live, because actually they're not as active as people often think. They spend a lot of sedentary time, but they're not relaxing in the same postures as we do in the West. We've made it as absolutely comfortable as possible as we can be, with reclining chairs and big comfy cushions and everything like that, which again switches off. It's a different input into the body. So some of the muscle and the posture, and it changes. If you can sit into a deep squat, if you can kneel on the ground, if you can sit in different positions, that actually is reinforcing some of the good postures that we need. So simple bits like that. The standing desks are another big one, which are okay, provided you're standing in a reasonable posture. Yeah. Because you can stand in just as poor a posture as you can sit in a poor posture. Well, so
there's numerous types of jello
to understanding.
Yeah, exactly. We can, just because we go from seated to standing doesn't necessarily make it better. I just comment to clients when they ask which should I do. I said they're both jello molds. No matter how long you sit into it, you'll find that shape. So best to keep moving. And it's like Bruce Lee says, be water, just keep on flowing through. Oh, well, Richard, I wish I had even another hour, or perhaps what we'll do is as you journey through this field of research into your PhD, I would love to have you come back on a somewhat, regular basis, so we can reconnect and find out, as you go through this journey, what is coming up, because I find this fascinating. It's something that we as physical kind of professionals in the fitness field, we don't really sit down and chat about as much as I think I know that I would like, and get deeper into the philosophical realm of movement. We typically stay with either biomechanics, kinesiology, or program design, and do what we really need to do right there in the moment. But to step back and look at the field as a whole, and what is missing, and what can we reinsert, or I would just love to do that.
I would absolutely love to as well. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk it through with you, and I hope there's other people that equally, if it's helping people just maybe consider thinking of things in different ways and just posing questions. It's one of the first things that my PhD supervisor instilled into me was, don't expect to be answering questions or all the questions through this journey. I'm probably going to end up with more questions at the end than I had to start with. And that's part of the process, and that's what you want. And so that to me is great. And the next steps where I'm going, I'm hoping to work with more AIM practitioners in particular. I've had to narrow things down slightly, as we've talked about. Physical intelligence could be this huge, massive thing, and where I'm going next is looking at from my own personal perspective, but talking to other people about their experiences. So how do we experience this thing that is physical intelligence? How do we experience this language of the body, and how we communicate? And how do we know our body knows what to do? How do we know we're doing the right thing? How does it feel what do you feel like when these things are going on, and particularly through the act of running, is where I'm focusing around, to give it some sort of constraints to work within. And then through the act of running, I'm going to tie it down a little bit more to the interaction of the foot to the ground. How does that maybe change dependent on the surface, dependent on the footwear, the interaction within the sort of the spinal engine and the bigger movements that we're working through, and through the breath as well. So there's lots of little bits, and my intention is to do some. I want to make it accessible. So like we've had this conversation, I don't want to do my research and end up, I don't particularly like writing, and I'm not the best at writing. I want to try and share it in a more accessible format. So I'm looking to go out and interview people whilst we're running, and video the runs while we're doing it. That will help us to discuss different parts, but to actually then share some of the research through the medium of video as well, to hopefully make it so people can relate to it a little bit easier than reading through the written word.
I look forward to that.
So there's lots of these things. So there's some of your colleagues in the UK I'm hoping to talk to a little bit more. I'm already talking to Chris around things, and lots of other people, and then we'll see where things develop. But yeah, I'm more than happy to continue chatting, because it helps me as much as anyone else, I'm sure.